In this video we're going to be looking at the different components of aggregate demand, and we've discussed these a little bit in class, but we just wanted to rehash some of the key points within each component. So we know that you should know the aggregate demand equation is C plus I plus G1 plus G2 plus X minus M. What we're going to discuss is what's got included in each of these different components and some things to watch out for, some tricks and things not to include in each component. And just remember that government, a GNE, or the genuine gross national expenditure, I'm on fire, is C plus I plus G1 plus G2. So it's all expenditure by Australians on any goods and services. That doesn't include exports, and imports are already included within C and I. My apologies. Alright, so basically if we were a primitive economy and we had no government, no trade with overseas, no savings and no investment, then basically aggregate demand would equal consumption expenditure. So all of our demand would be basically, as soon as we generate an income, we would spend it, and it would be spending on Australian goods and services. But then suddenly people realise there's benefits to saving and investing in the future, so aggregate demand becomes consumption plus investment. And the government come along and they tax people, which is going to reduce consumption and investment expenditure, but then they spend money on roads and public infrastructure and education and health. So aggregate demand suddenly becomes C plus I plus G1 plus G2. Then suddenly we chuck in international trade and aggregate demand becomes C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. So private consumption expenditure, it's about 60% of aggregate demand. It's the biggest component. It includes four main components. Consumer durables, which is basically stuff that you buy that lasts a long time. We don't purchase them frequently and they're long lasting. Cars, furniture, white goods, all of that kind of stuff. Semi-durables, things that we purchase relatively infrequently, clothing and footwear, for example. And then single-use goods, food, cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol, all things that we consume and then we basically buy, and then we consume them straight away. And also services are included within consumption. So if you get a hairdresser, if you go to a hairdresser, if you get your lawn mowed professionally, any dry cleaning, public transport, all that stuff is included in consumption expenditure. Investment expenditure, business capital spending on physical plant, buildings, vehicles and equipment. It's about 15 to 20% of aggregate demand. It is very volatile. Firms do not invest much during a trough, because what's the point? We're not selling anything, we probably don't have the money to invest, and there's no point in growing our business if we're not selling anything anyway. But during a peak, investment spending is really large. So remember, investment spending is the most volatile. Consumption spending is the biggest, investment spending the most volatile. It includes spending on by households on new houses. If you build your own house and you live in that house, the year that you build that house, it's included in investment expenditure. It doesn't include old housing. So if you buy somebody else's house, that will not be included in investment expenditure because it's not growing our aggregate demand. It's not creating wealth. It's not creating income. It's just swapping basically a house from one person to the other. The purpose of investment expenditure is to expand our productive capacity. Okay, the importance of investment expenditure is to make us more productive, and so we can produce quicker and more efficiently and generate more goods and services in the future. So it's about improving the efficiency of our labour and natural resources. It's about trying to boost our growth in the future by making us more productive. Okay, just a couple of things to be mindful of. Consumption expenditure, if you buy a private car, if you buy a white good for use in your home, like a dishwasher or a fridge, if you buy a home computer to use at home, if I go out and buy wheels for my new car, all that's private consumption expenditure. Investment expenditure, spending on new houses. If we buy a car for a business that's going to be used as part of a business, then it would be investment spending. Computers for business use, white goods for use in a business. If you're working in an industry that has a kitchen, then any spending basically would be included in investment expenditure if it's used as part of the business. Business purchases wheels for their business car at a different time that they purchase the car, then that would be included in investment expenditure as well. Investment expenditure doesn't include shares. It doesn't include old houses. It doesn't include white goods that basically, say, JB Hi-Fi would buy and then sell on to consumers. So when JB Hi-Fi buys them off the distributor or a warehouse, that would not be included, but then once they sell it on to consumers, that would be included. It also doesn't include wheels that you're just going to put onto a car. So for example, if Holden were to buy some wheels to put onto their cars and then make a big car with the wheels, obviously that's required, then that would be an intermediate product. That's very different to you just going out and buying some new wheels for your own car. Okay, so you've got to be very careful about what's included in consumption and investment and what's not. Government consumption expenditure, it's basically government expenditure for the provision of goods and services for current use. It's not capital goods. Okay, so it's spending by governments at all levels on things like defence, education, health, public services, politicians' wages, rent that they pay, salaries, all things that basically you can't touch that aren't helping to boost our productive capacity, but it's more for current expenditure. That's about 16% of aggregate demand. Okay, it doesn't include welfare. It doesn't include welfare because welfare is included once they start spending the goods and services in consumption. Investment expenditure is spending basically on buildings, hospitals, roads, schoolways. Again, very important for boosting our productive capacity. It's all about improving efficiency. It's allowing businesses to become more productive. So, for example, new roads are meaning less time spent in traffic. People are more productive. It helps to improve our international competitiveness because we can produce things cheaper because we're reducing petrol costs, we're spending less time in traffic, we're building better machinery and technology for businesses so that they will be able to do things more productively. So it's all about spending to boost our future productive capacity. And then we have net exports. Net exports is the difference between the value, okay, value is price times quantity of spending on exports minus the value of spending on imports. And it's generally about negative 4% of our aggregate demand, which basically means that import values are higher than export values. So imports represent about 24% of consumption and investment expenditure, and then exports are about 20% of our aggregate demand. So negative 4% in total. So generally what we say is Australia has what we call a trade deficit, which basically means the value of our imports is greater than the value of our exports. Okay, we'll discuss some of the macroeconomic things that affect exports and imports in the next chapter, but it's important to remember that it's the value of exports minus the value of imports is the value of net exports. Why do we deduct imports from aggregate demand? Well, because imports are already included as part of consumption and investment expenditure. So, for example, if I was to go out and buy a $1,000 computer from JB Hi-Fi that they brought from Thailand for about $800, all $1,000 would be included in consumption expenditure. Then we minus $800 because $800 is of an import. So the contribution to aggregate demand is just the $200 profit that company made by selling that computer. Okay, so we want to measure the demand for domestic Australian products, therefore we need to take out imports to see what we're actually spending on Australian goods and services. Okay, that's the end of that video. So it's really important that you take in some of the tricks of what's included in each component of aggregate demand.